I have handled 11,000 tokens in 6 years on the continuance wing, and I can tell you before I even turn one over, whether it belongs to someone still breathing. It isn't a gift. It's just attention. The Velmir never learned to pay it, not really. Not the way a person has to when the thing they're counting used to have a face. My title was Auditor, Human Liaison, Quota Reconciliation. What that meant, in the clean gray light of the wing, was that I sat at a long steel table under a bank of skylights and sorted small tokens, brass-toned, palm-sized, stamped with a serial and a colony designation, into 2 trays. Closed, adjusted. The second tray was the one nobody said out loud what it meant. Adjusted meant a family somewhere on Thesaurus Reach had come up on the wrong side of a formula, and their allotment had been folded back into the system, and their names had gone quiet. The Velmir called it continuance math. Population held to what the Reach could sustain. They were not cruel about it. That was the worst part. Cruelty would have been easier to hate. What they had instead was a species-wide talent for looking at 400,000 people as a single adjustable number, and never once flinching, because to a Velmir, a name and a digit were the same shape of thing. I flinched. That was supposed to be why they kept a human at the table at all. Some old directive about behavioral calibration, making sure the numbers still resembled the lives under them. In 6 years, I had never once seen it change a ruling. I flagged anomalies. They got logged, acknowledged, and folded back into the formula anyway, because a formula that bends for one case has to explain why it doesn't bend for the next 900. Mostly I just moved tokens from one tray to another and went home. The Velmir themselves were not unkind to me. Personally, Austin brought me a cup of the bitter gray tea he favored most mornings, out of what I understood to be genuine collegial habit. It was only the larger arithmetic that never once considered whether I slept well, because of what the tray in front of me represented. 2 things could be true of him at once, and usually were. The morning it changed, Auditor Prime Austin set a tray of 206 tokens in front of me for final reconciliation before the adjustment sealed. Routine. A neighboring block had come up short on grain allotment the previous quarter, the formula had run, and 41 households had already been flagged for adjustment. My job was to confirm the closures and route the tokens to be voided. Number 190. The file read, Household Dara Kesson, 3 members, processed 6 days prior. The token was already stamped voided across its face in the flat gray ink they used, the serial half-worn from handling the way they always were after processing, dozens of hands moving a dead file through the queue. I picked it up out of habit, to confirm the stamp, and it was warm. Not the console warm of sitting under a heat lamp, body warm, pocket warm. The kind of warm a thing only gets from being carried against skin, hour after hour, day after day, for longer than 6 days. I turned it over. The serial edge, the raised numeral rim stamped into every token at manufacture, sharp enough on a fresh one to catch a fingernail, was worn down to a glass-smooth curve on one side only. Not machine wear. Not transit wear, which scuffs a token evenly all around from tumbling in a bin. This was one particular groove, rubbed soft in one particular place, over and over, by one particular thumb, finding the same spot the way a person does with a worry stone. A processed token doesn't get carried. It gets voided and returned to stock the same shift it's flagged. The whole design of the tray system was to keep the dead ones moving fast enough that nobody ever had time to wear one down. This one had been carried so long and so constantly that somebody's thumb had reshaped the metal, and I sat there matching my own thumb to that groove, feeling how naturally my hand settled into a curve some smaller hand had already made. I know what a token feels like fresh from the foundry, and what one feels like after a season handed across market stalls. I had never felt one worn to this smoothness while its file said, in flat gray ink, that it had stopped existing 6 days ago. I sat with it in my palm for longer than I should have, under the skylight, feeling the warmth bleed slowly into my own skin, and I understood exactly what I was holding. Somewhere in the family block, 3 people had been marked processed. 2 of them, I had to assume, actually were. And a third, small enough, quiet enough, resourceful enough, had kept moving, had kept the token, had spent it, carefully, on whatever the dead file still permitted, because a closed household allotment doesn't get monitored the way a live one does. Nobody watches a grave for spending. A child was living off a corpse's ration code, and had been doing it for 6 days, and the only reason I knew was that her thumb had worn a groove in brass. Austin was 3 seats down, sorting his own tray with the placid, unhurried rhythm of something that had never once needed to hold its breath. If I flagged the token as active, which the rules required, which my calibration directive required, the anomaly would trigger a physical retrieval. Someone would be sent to the block, the girl would be found, and correctly re-added to a formula that had already decided the reach couldn't hold her. If I said nothing, the file stayed closed, and eventually, a week, a month, the ration code would lapse on its own schedule, and she'd starve on a technicality instead of a directive, which struck me as no mercy at all. I turned the token over twice more, weighing it, while Austin's tray clicked steadily 3 seats down. There was a third option, the one every liaison before me had apparently never bothered to look for, because it required believing a single worn edge on a single piece of brass was worth an afternoon of digging through records nobody else had opened in years. I believed it. So I did the thing I actually had the authority to do, which nobody had ever bothered using, because nobody who wasn't human would have thought to look for it. I pulled the manufacturing log. Every token carries, beneath the serial, a batch code, and Thesaurus Reach Batch 212, I already knew, had a documented stamping fault. Roughly 1 in 900 tokens got double-issued at the foundry before the error was caught. 2 live serials pressed to 1 household by clerical accident. It was a known, closed, thoroughly boring defect. I had read the report years ago, out of nothing but idle curiosity. I checked the batch. Token 190 belonged to it. I wrote up the file as a duplicate issuance clerical error, unrelated to household status, requiring the token be struck from the active adjustment queue and refiled under manufacturing defect, a designation with its own separate, much slower, much less interested review cycle. True, as far as it went. I had no evidence it wasn't true. I had only a warm token and a worn groove, and 11,000 hours of paying attention to things the Velmir didn't think were worth attention. Austin countersigned it without looking up. To him, it was 1 token, 1 line, 1 small correction in an ocean of correct lines. That was the whole trick of it. I wasn't fighting the formula, I was just more specific than it was. I voided the token properly this time, the honest way, and requisitioned a blank replacement under the defect code, and that evening, I took the long route home through the lower market instead of the transit rail, the way I never did, and I found her exactly where a 6-day survivor learns to sit, near the grain stalls, close enough to warmth, far enough back not to be noticed. I didn't crouch down. I didn't make a scene of it. I just held out my hand, token warm again from my own pocket now, and let her take it back the way you'd return something someone dropped. Careful with the edge, I told her. It's already worn soft in one spot. Don't wear through the whole thing. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has just done something you don't yet have language for, and closed her fist around it, and said nothing at all, and that was right. That was exactly right. Some things don't need a word stamped on them to be understood. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, in the low light between the grain stalls, thinking about how close it had come to turning on nothing but a texture. The Velmir had built a system that could track 400,000 people down to the decimal, and had never once thought to ask a question about touch. I went back to the wing the next morning and sorted tokens into 2 trays, the way I always had, and I never told anyone what I'd found in the batch code that day, because I hadn't found anything. Just a fault in the manufacturing, just a smooth place on a piece of brass, worn soft by a thumb that was still, against every formula the Velmir owned, alive. I kept running my own thumb over every serial edge after that, before I let a token drop into either tray, not because the rules required it, but because now I knew exactly what I was checking for.